Well, good morning and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us on this very hot and muggy day. We had to turn the air conditioning down in the theater just for all of you because it was very muggy in here. So you're welcome. We're going to continue on the series we started on the book of Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk is a difficult book in the sense that it's going to ask us some questions and we have to wait for God's answer. And sometimes we may not like the answer, but there's a reason for that. Let's recap what we talked about last week. So last week we asked the question, what hides in your heart? Remember, in Habakkuk chapter 1, Habakkuk is looking at the state of Israel, and he's looking at it and saying, "Okay, there's so much going on here, God." And then God says, "Well, guess what? There's more coming." And Habakkuk's like, "What?" And God says, "Well, let me tell you about the Babylonians." And Habakkuk's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! What do you mean the Babylonians?" And so what happens is as God is shaking the world of Habakkuk, Habakkuk's inner life or his real truth, how he actually sees the world, is actually being exposed. So we looked at chapter 1 and we said that basically when we think about this idea of violence in the world, so right now we are looking at a time in our world where there is a lot of wars going on. And it's not just like wars, but there's a potentiality for in different couple of places in the world for things to escalate, right? And again, every time you turn on the news, you're hearing about more and more of it going on. And you're asking yourself, okay, this has got to stop, right? This has got to stop. Like, when are cooler heads going to prevail, or saner heads, or I don't know, however you want to look at it. Like, when is this going to stop? Habakkuk's asking the same question, right? He talks about violence, evil, and suffering. And again, oftentimes, uh, people who are atheists or non Christians will say to us as Christians, well, if God is real, if God is all loving, then why all of this? And sometimes we as Christians are left with, like, oh, that's a good point, actually. I don't know. What do I do with all that? We talked about how God uses and allows this to exist as a means of correction and refinement. So the thing is, the Bible's never surprised about evil. We are surprised about evil, God is not. And we think about this because the fall invited evil into the world. But God will not create evil. We talked about this very clearly, right? God does not cause evil to happen. But God allows evil or uses evil that's already in choices of humanity to be able to use it to refine us as Christ followers. We talked about how God does not create evil, and this is really important, right? God does not create evil. We choose evil, and God uses the choices that we make to affect other things as well. And I said to you that discomfort is a most effective tool for our redemption. So as we are feeling this sense of like we are being turned around, we are being turned over, our lives are being disrupted, it's at these moments that we actually are being refined a lot more. And finally, we said that we are revealed in this process. And we looked at this scripture at the very beginning of it, of chapter 1. And I love how the New King James Version says it, right? The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. It's interesting to think about, and I don't know if we really process this the way we should, but it is a burden to be a Christian. Because oftentimes we see the world differently than everybody else. And as we continue to progress, the world is actually progressing so much further than where we are that it just seems ridiculous. It is going to be a burden, and it's going to be a greater burden. And again, I actually like that because it kind of weeds out a little bit more of what it means to be a Christ follower. But it is a burden to be a Christ follower. So that's what we looked at last week. This morning, we're going to take a look at a different topic. We're going to look at chapter 2. But before we do that, I'll show you a great article I came across called Pride and Humility by Thomas Terrence. He works for an organization called the C.S. Lewis Institute. And the C.S. Lewis Institute basically talks about topical topics in culture, but through the lens of C.S. Lewis's writing. And this is what he says. According to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti God state of mind. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. Now, that is a big claim if you think about it, right? It's funny to me how the church picks topics that they really want to go against. We say, oh, this thing is horrible. We're going to talk about this thing. But you know what's interesting? Is the church never really talks about pride. We don't really kind of go after pride. In pastors and churches and influencers and leaders and like, we don't really go after pride. We go after other things, but we don't go after pride. And I think it's a bit revelatory. He goes on to say this. C.S. Lewis, another top contender for having the greatest impact for Christ in the 20th century, called pride the great sin, the great sin. So C.S. Lewis, as he was writing Mere Christianity, devotes an entire chapter to this idea of pride and says that of all the sins, pride is going to be the fuel for the engine of sin. If this sounds like an exaggeration, it will help us to know that Lewis is not simply giving us a private opinion, but summarizing the thinking of great saints throughout the ages. Augustine, Aquinas, both taught that pride was the root of sin. Likewise, Calvin, Luther, and many others. Make no mistake about it, the pride is the great sin. It is the devil's most effective and destructive tool. And it's true. And we're going to look at this a bit further, actually, because obviously we're talking about pride today, and this is what God's going to talk about. But we're going to see how pride can hide itself in plain sight. And finally, he says this. From this point on in the Bible, we see the outworking of pride and unbelief in the affairs of individuals, families, nations, and cultures. As people lose or suppress the knowledge of God, spiritual darkness grows and psychological inversion occurs. In their thinking, God becomes smaller and they become larger. The center of gravity in their mental lives shifts from God to themselves. They become the center of the world, and God is conveniently moved to the periphery, either through denial of his existence or distortion of his character. Self-importance and godless self-confidence grow stronger. The cycle that follows is familiar. People exalt themselves against God and over others. Pride increases, arrogant and or abusive behavior ensues, and people suffer. So when we think about pride, we think to ourselves that yes, pride is there, but what we have to realize is that pride is going to fuel everything else that we do. And again, when we think about it, it's no exaggeration to talk about this. And what I like about this particular last paragraph in the article is we've talked about how Western culture is becoming increasingly secularized. We go, okay, culture is moving away from God, and that is not as it should be, but that is as it is. We go, fine. But in that vacuum, what do we replace it with? What is God replaced with? And I actually would say to you that that's what we're seeing right now. There are competing narratives going on in the world right now to compete for this God-shaped void, right? So we think about our world today, and we think to ourselves, okay, so if God is displaced, then what is it? So is it this? Is it politics? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Like, there's so many different things that we can actually choose to replace God. And it's all, again, I would argue with you, different forms of worship. But what is true about this, in all these cases, whenever God is replaced, whatever replaces God is uglier, meaner, and is actually has a toll upon countless others. And also, too, I like how he says that pride and unbelief in the affairs of individuals, families, nations, and cultures. So whenever any one of these, from the micro to the macro, whenever pride is embedded into culture, whenever pride is embedded into individual or families, there's always going to be a price to pay. With that as a backdrop, let's take a look at chapter 2 of the book of Habakkuk. So if you have your Bibles, you can take it out or electronic devices. We're going to look at chapter 2. But let me frame chapter 2 for you first before I jump in. Recall that Habakkuk had asked God two questions in Habakkuk 1. Why don't you do something? And 2, why are you using the wicked against the righteous? Now, these two questions have not been answered yet, right? And spoiler alert, they're not going to really fully answer in chapter 2, but you'll see kind of where God's going. So remember, Habakkuk says to God, okay, the evil, the powerful, the rich, the vain, these people are prospering, but the righteous, they're being trampled. And then God says, well, let me show you about the Babylonians. And Habakkuk's like, how could you even think about using this evil people to hurt the righteous? And so these are the questions that Habakkuk's asked. So as you jump in chapter 2, verse 1, the very beginning starts off like this. Habakkuk says, I will climb up to the watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. So Habakkuk in chapter 1 has just spewed. All right, God, here it is. And again, he's thrown down the gauntlet in many ways to God. And again, the questions he's asking are questions we may ask today. Chapter 2 starts off with, he goes, okay, now I'm going to wait. Now remember I said to you, one of the most terrifying verses in the Bible is when God replies. I don't know about you, but I kind of like a silent God sometimes. Because that means I get to do whatever I want anyways. Right? But when God answers, oh, okay, now I have to think. So the next verse starts off with this. Then the Lord said to me, Write my answer plainly on tablets so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it surely take place. It will not be delayed. So before God tells Habakkuk the answer to his question, he wants to make sure Habakkuk writes this down on tablets and sends it out so that everybody can be a part of this. So remember, Habakkuk is not just getting personal revelation, he is receiving for the nation of Israel. Well, the nation of the tribe of Judah in this particular case. So whatever he gets, he's going to write down, and so that others can hear this as well. And God wants to make sure that Habakkuk gets it. Now, what's interesting too is the word correct. Make sure you tell him what I say, not your interpretation of what I said, not what you think I said, not what you feel about what I said. Just tell them what I said. And we go, okay. Now, just a quick note here, just to remind you where we are in the timeline here. Habakkuk is writing around 607 BC. Now, the reason I want you to know this, because in 605, just a couple of years, this is when Babylon does its first raid on Israel. Okay? So it's only a couple of years after this. Habakkuk does not know this. So when God says, hey, it's going to be coming, be patient, he's not wrong. Habakkuk has no idea, but he's not wrong. So Habakkuk is on the cusp or on the brink of the destruction of Judah as a nation. He doesn't know it, but God has told him it's going to happen. Habakkuk's like, okay, but I just want to show you in the timeline, it's coming very, very soon. Now let's go to verse 4 and 5. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. Wealth is treacherous, and the arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide as the grave, and like death, they are never satisfied. In their greed, they have gathered up many nations and swallowed many peoples. Now, God is going to first preface what is going to come up next here with this few verses. Because who's he targeting here? Who's he talking to? Well, he tells us in the very first part, look at the proud. Now, what I think is interesting about that, and what I want you to kind of lock into your brains is, wherever the tribe of Judas ended up, is because of their pride. What is about to happen to them is because of their pride. And because of that, everything that's about to follow is because of that one thing that we just talked about at the very beginning there. Now, the next several verses, and not several verses, next part of the chapter, it's going to go through something called the 5 woes. Okay? Habakkuk chapter 2 is famous, and I say famous for people who know, but he's going to now talk about the 5 woes. Okay? And I want to show you what those 5 woes are. Now, in the NLT, it translates woes as sorrow. I put woe in bracket there so you could see, but these are now going to be the 5 woes or the 5 sorrows of the people. Now, commentators have debated whether this is for Babylon or for Israel. I would say to you it's for both. I don't think we have to say it's only for Babylon or only for Israel. I would say it's for both. And we're going to see why in a little bit, why that means so. So it starts off in verse 9 to 11. What sorrow or woe awaits you who build big houses with money gained dishonestly? You believe your wealth will buy security, you're putting your family's nest beyond the reach of danger. But by the murders you've committed, you have shamed your name and forfeited your lives. The very stones in the walls cry out against you, and the beams in the ceilings echo the complaint. So again, this is the first woe. This is the first thing that God brings against Israel and will bring against Babylon in the future. Next, in verse 12 to 14, which is the next woe. What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of heaven's armies promised that the wealth of nations will turn to ashes? They work so hard, but all in vain. For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with awareness of the glory of God. Now, that word vain is, again, for those of you who remember from Ecclesiastes, when he says vanity, vanity, all is vanity, it's vapor. It's temporary, right? So he's saying here that everything that you've worked so hard for is temporary. Now, verses 15 to 16. What sorrow or woe awaits you who make your neighbors drunk? You force your cup on them so you can gloat over their shameful nakedness. But soon it'll be your turn to be disgraced. Come and drink and be exposed. Drink from the cup of the Lord's judgment, and all your glory will be turned to shame. Now, before we continue on here, it's kind of a bummer here, right? But you see what God is doing here. He's targeting specific behaviors. And again, under the framework of pride, this is what people do. This is how people behave. Okay? And finally, verse 18 to 20. What sorrow awaits you who say to the wooden idols, wake up and save us? To speechless stone images you say, rise up and teach us. Can an idol tell you what to do? They may be overlaid with gold and silver, but they are lifeless inside. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So Habakkuk needs a right perspective on what God is doing in this world. God is just. The 5 woes made it clear that God knew the sins of his people and would deal with them in due time. So what's interesting is chapter 1, God is answering the first part of Habakkuk's complaint. And the first part is, why? Why are you letting this happen? Right? Oftentimes, in the midst of suffering and temptation and trials, in life not going the way we want, the first question we ask ourselves is, well, does God know? Is God aware? Has God forgotten me? Right? And again, in the vastness of the world, in the vastness of stories of other people, we can feel that way, can't we? We go, well, we're going through this maybe because God's turned his back on something, or maybe he's over here in this part of the world, or maybe he's over there, and we can kind of trick our mind into thinking these things, that we are no longer, that God's presence isn't with us. And the proof of that is, well, things are going wrong. Habakkuk says the same thing to God, right? Habakkuk is seeing Israel. He's seeing the depravity of Israel. Remember, Josiah, the last righteous king in Judah's history, Josiah's next 2 kids, his son and his grandson, are going to turn their nation to idolatry. And because of that, they're going to move away from Yahweh, away from God's laws. And because they're going to do that, then all of a sudden, all this evil, all this recklessness, all these things are going to take place. Ray Stedman, in his commentary on chapter 2, said this: the rest of chapter 2 is a picture of how 5 different forms of pride by which men seek to live are shown to be self-destructive. The man of pride will fall apart. The man of faith has present power to live. Not only will he wind up a victor, but even now he will live by his faith. This is the great lesson of this book. And he's not wrong. Again, we take the 5 woes and we put them side by side here. We see exactly what God is talking about. We talk about extortion. Remember, it's not wealth. It's how it's gained, right? And again, by murder, by corruption, by exploitation, this is not okay with God. Because again, when we talk about all these things here, we know it's usually the poor that are taking the brunt of this, right? We talk about affluence, right? We think that our resources, we think the people who listen to us, we think about all the followers we have, or whoever it might be, this will buy security or love or acceptance. We think about this corruption. And I think it's so interesting how God is very much aware of injustice, right? How we think to ourselves that we look at the world around us, we go, well, God is aware, and he knows. He's not unaware of that. We talk about exploitation, right? We talk about how people will convince others to do something so they can gloat or they can revel or whatever it might be there. And so we talk about exploitation. And finally, of course, as always, it's idolatry. Now, before I go any further, I want to reference back to something I mentioned to you a couple of weeks back. It came from the book How Should We Then Live by Francis Schaeffer. Remember Edward Gibbon? Again, remember, this is written in the 1700s. Edward Gibbon was showing the 5 characteristics of the Roman Empire right before it collapsed. And tell me if any of these seem familiar to you. Edward Gibbon, in his Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire, said the following 5 attributes marked Rome at its end. First, a mounting love of show and luxury, that is affluence. Second, a widening gap between the very rich and the very poor. This could be among countries and the family of nations, as well as a single nation. Third, an obsession with sex. Fourth, freakishness in the arts, masquerading as originality and enthusiasms pretending to be creativity. Fifth, an increased desire to live off the state. It all sounds so familiar. We've come a long road since our first chapter, and we are back in Rome. Well, I would say to you, let's even go one step further. We are back in Babylon. Right? So when we think about this thing from Edward Gibbon there, his assessment of the Roman Empire is absolutely 100% correct. But if we look at this assessment for our culture today, again, not that I want to be overly dramatic, but too late for that. I think we can see the parallels here today. When any one of these 5 characteristics we can see in our culture right now, which begs the question, what happens next? Zachary Karras said this, and this is kind of interesting. He says, in fact, we can make a connection that while God in Habakkuk 2 pronounces judgment on the nation of Babylon, Jesus in Matthew 23 pronounces judgment on the nation of Israel. In its rejection of Christ, Israel had become a new Babylon and would thus be judged like other idolatrous nations. So in Matthew chapter 23, we know that Jesus has his woes as well. Woe to you, Pharisees! Woe to you, nation of Israel! Right? He has his woes as well. And what's interesting about that is that we believe that he is kind of mimicking Habakkuk's version of this as well too. But remember, Habakkuk was talking about Israel and Babylon, and Jesus was talking about Israel becoming Babylon. Jesus was talking about Israel becoming the Romans, Israel abandoning the faith that they had. And because of that, these two parallel accounts are there. So let's go back to this. Let's answer these questions here. Recall that Habakkuk had asked God two questions. Why don't you do something? And why are you using the wicked against the righteous? Now, the framework for this is in verse 4. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves and their lives are crooked. So let's talk about pride and what it does to us and what it does to a culture, what it does to a country, what it does to a nation. Charles Spurgeon, I think, has the best understanding of pride because oftentimes we think of pride, we think of the rich, we think of the beautiful, we think of the affluent. But Charles Spurgeon has a different way of looking at it. He says this: if there is a sin that is universal, it is this. Where it is not to be found, hunt among the highest and loftiest in the world, and you shall find it there. And then go searching amongst the poorest and the most miserable, and you shall find it there. There may be as much pride inside a beggar's rags as in a prince's robes, and a harlot may be as proud as a model of chastity. Pride is a strange creature. It never objects to its lodgings. It will live comfortably enough in a palace and will live equally at ease in a hovel. Is there any man in whose heart pride does not lurk? Now, this is important because what I think Spurgeon really picks up on is that we can all have a false sense of modesty or a false sense of pride. Like sometimes when people say, well, no, God can't use me, just so you know, that's a proud statement. Wait, what? I thought I was being humble by saying God can't use me. No, you're framing God in such a way that you think that God can't do something. That means you are becoming greater than God by telling God what he can or cannot do. In that statement is a source of pride. So when Charles Spurgeon says this, I think it's kind of important. Now, you know this verse, Proverbs 16 to 18. I like the Complete Jewish Bible's version of the translation. Says this: pride goes before destruction and arrogance before failure. Have you ever asked yourself why? Why is pride the first step towards failure? Why is pride the first step towards destruction? Because pride tells you you don't need to listen to anybody. Pride tells you you don't need anybody telling you, teaching you. You know everything. And that one statement that you know everything is a complete lie, but you believe it. Pride tells you that you are greater than. Pride tells you that you are isolated. Pride tells you that, again, let's go down the list. The reason why pride fuels everything else is the first assumption of pride is, I am greater. And when I am greater, then therefore I don't need God. I don't need community. I don't need, and again, the list goes on. Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but if I said to you, what is the first sin of the Bible? You will say when Adam and Eve ate the fruit. And I would say to you, wrong. In Genesis chapter 3, oops, I think I might have hit the button twice, so I may have to go further. Yeah, can we go back? Can I go back? Okay, I'll try it again. Yeah, it's okay. We'll get there. There we go. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. What did the serpent appeal to? What was the use of the serpent? Yes, doubt. Did God really say? So what happens when we say, did God really say? We go, But now look at the second part in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. God knows that your eyes will be open as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. In verse 6, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her, so she took some of the fruit and ate it. The first lever towards humanity's fall was pride. what was the proposition that the serpent was actually offering to Adam and Eve? Equality with God. And as soon as you make that assumption, as soon as you believe you're equal to God, and in Habakkuk's cry, in Habakkuk's complaint, is this belief that he knows what's best. When you ask yourself, what's going on? It's an okay statement to make. Yes, Lord, I don't know what's going on. There's a way of saying that. But then, if we say that, what we're really saying is, this is how things should be. Why isn't God fixing it? This is the way my life, this is the trajectory of my life. This is the way it's off the rails, off the tracks, not the way it's going as it's supposed to. Why isn't God doing something? Right? Why isn't God doing something? So the first part of Habakkuk was saying, like, what's going on here? Why isn't God doing this? And so what's interesting is when we look at the faces of pride and the five woes, God gives us 5 examples of how pride manifests itself. But let me condense it into 4 points here. Pride is most often associated with success. People who are proud are people who feel they have something that's greater than what they are. Now, what's interesting about this is back when I was in Bible college, if I had $100 in my bank account, I thought I was rich. If I had 100, I'm like, ooh, okay, I got some money here. It's time for some ramen. All right, fantastic, right? Like I thought that was a lot. But the thing is, though, as you grow and as you continue to grow further, that doesn't seem like anything now, right? So what happens is it's not about what you have, but often it's your perception of it. So if you perceive that you are comfortable, when you perceive that things are going the way you want to, pride creeps in. And what happens then? What's the next step after pride? Well, I don't need God. I don't have to think about God. I don't have to worry about God. Why? I got a positive balance in my bank account. I have this happening in my life. I've got that going on. Do you remember back a couple weeks ago? There's a quote that I shared with you about when we often go to God when our foundations are being shaken, not realizing it's God shaking them. That's what pride is. Is pride then creates this idea that I am equal to God, maybe greater than God, and God needs to go, okay, let me just go ahead and show you your actual reality. So this is why pride goes before destruction. It's because as soon as we believe that we do not need God, that is the first step of pride. When Adam and Eve saw the apple and were convinced that they could be like God, that was a pride that they wanted. That's how they wanted to look at it. Now, what's interesting is pride corrupts our resources. Now, the reason I say that to you is if you look at the 5 woes, many of them are around money. Money, right? Many of them are around corruption and violence and money, but it's an exploitation. It's injustice. It's taking advantage of the poor. It's using murder to advance yourself and to fill your bank accounts out. See, pride corrupts our resources. What pride tells us is our resources are ours. It's ours. It's mine. I've earned this money by working for this boss I don't even like, this job I don't even want to do. It's mine. Therefore, I can do what I want with it. And okay, forget about the money part of it. Let's talk about your time, right? I think if I was to ask everybody in this room here, are you busy? How's your week been? Busy. Busy. Everyone's busy. We're all busy. And it's true, we are all busy. At the end of the week, someone said to me, well, what's your week like? And I had to kind of go, what did I do this week? I know I did something. I didn't stay in bed all week long. And then I realized, oh yeah, I wake up in the morning and like by the end of the day, I'm like, 9:30 at night, I'm in bed. I know it's early, but I get up early too, right? But that you're like, okay, my life is busy. But I just want you to know something. When we say our life is busy, what we're really saying is we have chosen what to occupy our time with. And the question we should ask ourselves is, did God make it into any of that? In the business of our day, and again, please understand, everybody's busy. Children are busy, jobs are busy, school's busy, it just, whatever, it's all busy, and I get that. But are we so busy that we forget about God? And what that acknowledges is that we don't have time for God. Because maybe we don't need God, maybe we don't need to have that time with God. So pride corrupts our resources. Pride turns people from a who to a what. This is really important because in the 5 woes, God levels against Israel. What he says to them is this: you are hurting people. You are exploiting people. And again, those who are exploited are usually the vulnerable. It's hard to exploit somebody who's got tons of resources. It's very easy to exploit those who are poor. And again, I would say to you right now, we're seeing in the world this exploitation writ large. We are seeing it all over the place. We are seeing it, I would say we're seeing it right in our backyards as well too. Right? Exploitation happens everywhere. And again, please very, very, very clearly, God's not okay with that. He's not okay with that. He has never been okay with the poor and the vulnerable. And again, in the Bible, in the biblical times, and I think it's still today, it's women and children. Women and children always bore the brunt of whatever the exploitation was. And so when he talks about Israel, when he talks about the five woes, you'll notice that the language is, you've exploited, you've killed people to get ahead. You've built these huge homes for yourself while people are living in the streets. You have taken the resources that I've given you, that I've blessed you with, and you think it's yours to do whatever you want with. And God's like, that's pride. That's pride. And that's the first step towards the direction you don't want to go. And finally, pride raises us above God, but only in our own minds. As soon as I think I'm equal to God, as soon as I think I don't need God, that's the seed of pride. That seed will germinate, and that will begin to move us away from God. That will make us apathetic for our faith. That will make us apathetic for our spiritual disciplines, apathetic towards community, apathetic again in whatever, again, use whatever terminology you want. But when we believe that we are equal to God or simply don't need God, and again, think about that statement for a second. What human being on this planet doesn't need God? But we can say that, can't we? We may not articulate it, but we live it. We may not say, I don't need God. Of course, we wouldn't never say that. There's a term that was coined a couple of years ago called practical atheist. And what it meant was, the term was actually applied to Christians. And the term basically is that, yes, we proclaim God, and we sing worship songs, and we go to church, but we actually live like atheists. Because nothing about our life changes. There's nothing about the cost of being a Christian that actually affects us. Our money, our time, our talents, our habits, all these things look exactly the same as culture. So yesterday I got to officiate Tim and Sarah's wedding. So some people who are not here today are still in Coburg. I drove back to be with all of you this morning. But in my sermon, Tim and Sarah were really adamant that they wanted to make sure that people who were attending their wedding understood how much faith meant to them, how important it was. And one of the most common ways I talk about this when I talk about premarital counseling, when I talk to different couples, depending on the context, is the difference between a covenant and a contract. Right? We think about what a covenant is and what a contract is. So I explained to everybody. So I started off by this, and it was so funny because you can always tell. I almost don't want to use this term, but I'm going to. You can almost tell authentic Christians to those who are just nominal. Because I started off with a statement like this. I said, I started off with a story. Back in 2008, George Barna, the Barna Group, came out with a study that said Christian marriages divorce as much as non-Christian marriages. And just so you know, that took the world by storm, right? Because here's a Christian organization admitting that Christians were divorcing at the same rate as non-Christians. And so like places like CNN and like all these different outlets picked up on this and saying, see, Christians, you're lying to yourselves. You think your faith is that important? It is not. Until this woman named Shanti Feldman, she is a Harvard-trained sociologist, saw this study and said, wait, that doesn't seem right. So she asks Barna Group for the data and begins to drill down on it and says, okay, let's talk about what you're doing. And what she found was, the first mistake she found was, something I've told you about before, is people who profess Christianity versus people who actually are Christians. Now, there's a couple of questions you can ask. If someone says, I'm a Christian, ask them, when's the last time I went to church? Whoa, you're telling me I have to go to church to be a Christian? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying, actually, yeah. When's the last time you served, or when's the last time you actually sacrificed or gave, or whatever the aspects, right? So when she drilled down and used these as metrics, guess what she found out? Christian marriages had a vastly higher percentage of success over non-Christian marriages by orders of 37 to like 52%, I think, something ridiculous like that. Like it wasn't even close. But what's interesting though is subsequent studies using this framework have validated that information. Now, I told this at the marriage, but here's how you can tell the authentic Christians with the non-authentic Christians. The authentic ones are like, yeah, okay. And the non-authentic ones are like, Are you sure about that? Are you Right? You kind of tell, right? But the point is this: God has to mean something to us. If He doesn't, then what are we talking about here? God has to require something of us. But the thing that fights Him more than anything else, right? And so, as I said to you before, the church today has gotten itself into trouble by going after these particular causes, right? And again, you know what I'm talking about, right? And again, whether it's politics, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, again, pick your topic. The church has really gone after them, and again, I get that. But what we haven't gone after is pride. We haven't said, you know what? Maybe a church of this size with a person of this thing, maybe that's not the way. Or maybe this person who speaks for Christianity or calls himself a Christ follower, living this lifestyle may not be. Maybe a pastor driving a Lamborghini to their church may not be the best thing. Maybe, just maybe. We will never say that. You know why? It's not the sin that we want to talk about. And what's interesting, though, is I would say that that's actually kind of shifting a little bit. There's preachers and sneakers. There's all these kind of like social media websites now. There's a new one I started following called I think it's called Religious Business, and they look at these churches that run themselves like businesses, but again are whole different conversation. But I've been following that one and I have a podcast as well too. I've been listening. But the point is the sin that is the greatest sin of all. The church is vastly silent on. If I'm saying to you that Calvin, Luther, Lewis, Augustine, Aquinas, all the great thinkers of the church have said that the greatest sin in the church is what? Pride. What are we talking about today? Politics, gender, vaccinations. We're talking all this stuff here, but really what we should be talking about is where does pride find its foothold in our hearts? The reason why God could do nothing with Judah anymore, the reason why God brought about the destruction of Judah in 586, pride. Are you getting the severity of it now? See, we can say pride, we can say all these things about it, but when you realize the implications of what it actually does to us, then you start to realize something of how dangerous it actually is. Now, the question is what's the answer to pride? You would say humility. I'd say you're wrong. It's not humility, because God tells us. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. This is the exact line right after it, right? So look at the proud, but what's the opposite of pride to God, according to how He says to Habakkuk? It's not humility, it's faithfulness. It's faith. And again, I would say the prophet Habakkuk is the first person to articulate this in such a way, but the New Testament authors pick it up all over the place. Right? So the writer of Hebrews, Paul in Romans, and Galatians, he picks up on this, right? The righteous will live by faith. Now, let me ask you the question. Why is faith the antidote to pride? Why is faith, according to Habakkuk, according to what God says to Habakkuk, why is faith the antidote to pride? I'll tell you. Faith is not the antithesis of doubt. It is the acknowledgement of the limitations of our knowledge and understanding. Faith combats pride because eventually life does fall apart. And the proud are left devastated while those with faith are strengthened. So Habakkuk is living in a time where the end is near. He doesn't know it, but he does see the reverberations around it. He looks around Israel, he looks around Judah, and he sees idolatry. He sees exploitation. He sees injustice. He sees perversion. And he's like, God, why? Why are you allowing evil to flourish? And why can't the righteous do anything? And what's God's response to Habakkuk? The righteous will live by faith. Why is that the answer? Because when life doesn't go your way, and just so you know, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank account or how much money you don't have in the bank account, it doesn't matter how many friends you have, it doesn't matter where you are in life, eventually life's going to turn around and not go the way you want it to. Do you know who's devastated when life doesn't go the way you want it to? The proud. This is proud. Why? How can it not go my way? I'm fantastic. I'm amazing. I have so much to give. How can it not possibly go my way? While the faithful, I just trust God. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on in this world. And I have said this to you numerous times, but let me say it 2 more times. I don't know what's going on in the world. I really don't. It's just everything is topsy-turvy. Like just every time I, literally every time I open up the newspaper, or then my digital newspapers, it's like, oh, okay, now we're talking about this now. Let's go ahead with that. I don't know what's going on. It's not so much about what's going on. It's not about what's not going right. It's not about any of these things. If you trust, and again, truly trust in God, then you will have faith. And you'll go, Lord, I don't know what's going on, but I trust you. I trust you. Now, please understand something. There are two sides to this, because I know you as a church and I know your hearts. The first side of this is things that I do that have caused where I'm at. And that can happen. That's called consequences, and that is part of it. But that doesn't shake our faith. But the secondary part of it is that I had nothing to do with it. I was just walking along, and all of a sudden, bam! And again, faith. Because whether you caused it or whether you didn't cause it, either circumstance, if you truly have faith in God, it's not about the circumstances, it's about your relationship with God. This is why God starts off with, look at the proud, right? Look at the proud, right? And the term that God uses there is crooked. Their lives are crooked. Now, I love that term because crooked is a Hebrew idea that following God is just kind of like like that's God and I follow towards God, right? I don't meander, I go that way. The proud, like, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, I want that, this is mine, that should be mine, yeah, and again, crooked. The faithful, no matter what happens, the trajectory is Yahweh, the trajectory is Jesus, and that's the direction I'm going. This is why God says the antithesis to pride is faithfulness. Final thought. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. One of the things I said in yesterday's sermon to Sarah and Tim is in a covenant relationship, there are three people, right? So I use the analogy of contract, right? I said, if you have a mortgage here, you know what a contract is. If you have a car payment, you know what a contract is. If you have a cell phone, you know what a contract is, right? Contract are if-then statements. If you don't pay, I get your car, right? If you don't pay, I'm going to shut your cell phone off, right? If-then statements. Covenant is three people, right? So Tim, Sarah, and God. And by loving Tim and by loving Sarah, they also are loving God as well. That's the covenant relationship of marriage. But what we understand as well, too, is that we are also in a covenant relationship with God, right? The triune God, for sure. And that doesn't mean if-then statements. So if I'm good, then God will bless me. If I'm bad, God will curse me. We have consequences. We know life happens. But a covenant relationship is, if we truly understand grace, we go to God, we seek forgiveness, and we are forgiven or redeemed over and over and over again. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. You, me, all of us are really bad at knowing what's the right thing to do. Because if we're really honest, the right thing to do is what makes us happy. That gives us the most benefit, that gives us the most resources, that gives us the most things. And sometimes that means bending the rules, and sometimes it means treating a who like a what, and all the five woes that the Israelites and the Babylonians, those are the sources of pride. Pride is insidious. It hides itself. It is always your friend. It always seeks to make you think you're greater than yourselves. Eve and Adam, the lever that the enemy used to get them to sin, to choose to make that decision, was pride. She wanted to have knowledge. They want to have knowledge like God. They want to be like God. That's pride. Because why did the enemy do that to them? Why was that his first level of attack? Because that was his weakness as well. Because what does the Bible tell us? The devil saw God and wanted equality with God. So he led a war of angels against God. Well, good luck with that. But that's what happened. If I say to you that pride is the greatest sin, it is because it is the fuel for all the other sins. Every sin hangs its hook on pride because pride is what gives it permission to do. But if we have faith and we are humble, we are teachable, we know that we are not enough. We know life doesn't go the way we expect it to. We also know when the world starts to fall apart, God is still in control. And we have trust and we have faith and we know that we are given mercy and grace. Let's pray. The worship team is going to come back up. Just would love you to have your heads bowed and your eyes closed, just to have a moment to reflect, a moment to think. I'm not kidding to you when I say that pride is insidious. It hides itself in places we would not expect. It wears masks we do not recognize. But it is in all of us. And it gives us hints that it's there. Hints like, I don't need God. Or these rules don't apply to me. Or this person is a means to an end. This pleasure is more important. This thing is more important. This addiction is more important. It's all of these and more. We live in a culture that glorifies pride. We think that pride is a virtue rather than what it really is the first step towards sin. My prayer for all of you is that we sit with the prophet Habakkuk and we have our hearts revealed by the Spirit. We say, oh, I didn't know that was there, but there it is. That ugliness, that darkness, it's in me too. But the righteous will live by faith. The righteous will live by faith. We believe not in the circumstances, not in our surroundings, not in the outcomes, but we believe in God. Our lives may not go the way we expected them to. The trajectory of our lives may not be what we wanted them to be, but God is still God, and He's still in control. Not the control you want, not the control I want, but control nonetheless. He will use the circumstances of this world to correct us and to refine us. And the faithful will say, yes, Lord. The proud will say, no. The proud will shake their fist at the heavens and say, why me, God? While the faithful will say, why not me? Dear Lord Jesus, I thank you. I thank you for the lessons of Habakkuk, and I thank you for the prophet's words. Lord, his complaint is my complaint. It's our complaint. God, why do you seem to not to move, to act, to do things that we expect? Why, God, do you not perform the miracles that we think you should? Why do you not align our lives the way we think we should? Why do you not do what you should do? Why are the evil in this world prospering while the righteous seem to suffer? Where are you, God? This is the complaint of Habakkuk, but honestly, it's all of our complaint as well, because we feel it too. And your response to us, Lord, is pride is tearing this world apart. Pride is causing the injustice, the exploitation, the corruption of all that you intended to be good. I pray, Lord, before we complain about what we see in the world around us, we first take a look into our own lives and see the pride that would be there. And then, Lord, after having done so, please, Lord Jesus, make us instruments of your reconciliation. Please use us, Lord, to live by faith. Holy Spirit, reveal, guide, convict if necessary, the areas in our lives that we need to surrender to you fully and wholly. And God, if we see pride in our lives, Lord, let us just confess it so that the enemy would not get a foothold. We would not feel superior to you. Thank you for your mercy and your grace in all things, Lord, because we desperately need it. In Jesus' name, amen.